Darling, please give me a hand.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me. I'd like to start today by saying thank you to 4 separate groups of people today, and that's very important, and I hope you'll see why in just a second. The first group of people is the people who put this event and made it happen. So let me say thank you very much to Yuri and the whole team behind you. I really appreciate it, guys. I love this place. I mean, look at the view. And I already had a discussion about how much I love Rotterdam. It's my first time here. So thank you very much for having me here. Now,
Can you speak in the mic a little bit?
it is very important to also say that everything that I'm going to say tonight is my views and my views only. They do not in any way, shape, or form reflect the views of Singularity University Netherlands in general or Yuri in particular. So if there is any backlash, as I promise there will be, that should be directed entirely, exclusively, and at me only. And Yuri and the team take a big chance to bring me here. They're taking a big risk. And I want to thank them again for that. And I want to say that to me, that means that they care. Because people who actually care are the people who take the risks and who go put themselves on the line. So if there is again any backlash after this, I'll be okay, but make sure you stand by the local people here in Rotterdam, because they rock. Now, I also want to say thank you all to you who came here. I know some are coming from northern France, I heard from Amsterdam and from, I don't know, a number of other places. And I really appreciate that, because in the end of the day, I cannot be a speaker without an audience. I cannot be a blogger without an audience. I cannot be a podcaster without an audience. I cannot be anything that I kind of have become in the last 6 years without an audience. So thank you for that. And I want to say also thank you to all my blog readers. They're a very special group for me. And another group is my donors. Thank you guys, because you know I don't have anything to sell. And you know that everything that I have produced in the last 6 years of my life, I have given away for free entirely to anyone who has cared to listen to it, to read it, to spit on it, or to do whatever they feel like. And the reason that I have been able to survive and to get where I'm getting and to be here tonight is also because of you. Because as I said, I don't have anything to sell. So thank you for that. Okay, so let me tell you about 2 people to begin with, Henry Fonda and James Hunt. So Henry Fonda was this famous actor who is known, he had a career spanning maybe 50 or 60 years. And he's known for throwing up every night before going up on stage for 50 or 60 years. Those of you who may have seen Formula One, Niki Lauda's arch nemesis, James Hunt, used to do the exact same thing, they say. Every time before he got in the car, he threw up. And they usually thought that's a good sign, actually. So I feel exactly the same way every time before I go to speak somewhere. Now, it doesn't mean you got to bring a bucket, but I just want to say that it's very normal that I'm scared before I speak. Tonight, I'm actually double scared. Not double scared, that's an understatement. I have never been more scared in my life speaking in front of an audience, because tonight I'll be performing something that if you happen to be a rookie in the wrong army unit in the Bulgarian army, as I was, you may be forced to try and do. And hopefully tonight it's a metaphor, but it's a real thing. And it's the following. You take a loaded AK-47, you chamber a bullet, you put the barrel in your mouth, and you start playing with what's called the soft trigger. That's the little bit of space that the trigger moves, that kind of movement, before it hits and it releases the bullet. And so you have to know exactly how far your trigger goes before the bullet gets released, before the hammer fires the bullet. And if you misjudge, your head gets blown off. So I'm kind of doing this tonight. And you guys, of all the people, get to decide if I walk with my head off tonight or if I get destroyed. So, no pressure. The first time I grew a beard, my own growing grandma told me that I looked like an escaped convict. When I was at SU, a friend of mine there told me that I looked like a James Bond villain. And so, given my message today, I thought I'd dress for the part. Because if I'm not successful in putting forward a good argument today, I will possibly end up being the villain and may lose all my reputation, my personal brand that I have worked for building for the past 6 years, and potentially alienate a lot of people. If I'm successful, however, I will be as successful as a child. One particular child, but a child nevertheless. So why put myself in such a terrible situation? At worst a villain, probably a stupid one, and at best a child. Because if I'm wrong about this, then the cost will be mine to bear alone. And that's fine. But if I'm right, the benefit may actually span a lot of people, both inside of this hall and potentially across the world. So as I said above, my thesis today will be that of a child that had the audacity to make a simple and perhaps very obvious statement. And the statement is this: the emperor has no clothes. Our emperor has no clothes, my friends. That's what I'll be speaking about tonight. This possibly sounds like a bit of a crazy statement, both in terms of relevance, but also in terms of accuracy. And so before I'm able to even get to that statement and start cracking the nuts, I will actually spend a lot of time telling you about my personal story. If you've seen any of my Singularity one-on-one interviews, you will know that I'd like to try and showcase the personalities of the people that I interview almost as much as the work that they do. You see, I believe that this matters. I think it matters if people are living their message. And I think it is good to know at least a little bit about their personal history, motivation, dreams, fears, and idiosyncrasies. Because it helps us both to understand and to judge their work better. And so the reason I will spend time on my own story today is not because I think it is so amazing or interesting in any way. In fact, pretty much everyone in SU and most people in this hall probably have a much better story to tell than I do. But the reason is that I believe it will give you a better idea of where I'm coming from, what is my motivation, what are my personal flaws, biases, and inclinations, what is my greatest strength and the biggest weakness at the same time, and what are the most common mistakes I tend to make. And that in turn will help you be a better judge of my thesis that the emperor has no clothes. And so, as Yuri said, today the plan is to have a 3-hour symposium. My presentation will be roughly the first third or so. During that time, I plan to tell you about my journey from Bulgaria to Singularity and beyond. And if I'm lucky, to crack some nuts. During the second hour, I will be interviewed by Yuri on any topic that he feels may be of interest and of benefit. And in the last third hour, you're free to ask me anything you feel like. You will also have the opportunity to answer one of my questions that I always ask after each and every interview is over. I've done about 180 so far. And that question is always the same. What did I just screw up? So feel free to say that before you ask your question. Okay, so let me move on to my story. I was born in Bulgaria in 1976, behind the Iron Curtain, for those of you who may be old enough to remember. My father's parents were communists, hardcore communists. My grandfather, his father used to be from a well-off family, got a mining engineer degree, and after the collapse of communism became the director of the uranium mine in Bulgaria. My mother's parents were anti-communists. So my grandfather had a third-grade education and was a very successful small businessman. And when the communists came, they appropriated all his properties and put him as a night watchman in a warehouse for the rest of his life. So there was kind of pressure in the family, or let's say tension, from the very beginning. Of course, the communist side were very atheistic, and the other side, my grandmother, was very religious, Orthodox Christian. So I grew up kind of at sort of the edge between these two views. And I became pretty much the hellion terrorist child of the neighborhood. So, for example, I was a child in school, I think it was first grade, that one day started arguing with all my friends that Santa Claus doesn't actually exist. And I got totally kind of frustrated when the teacher wouldn't confirm or deny that, because I thought his job was to say the truth. Whereas he diplomatically said, well, anyone can ask their parents and they will tell them. And of course, that infuriated a lot of parents when some other kid tells their kid that Santa Claus doesn't actually exist. Later on, I remember we were in school, and that was still in communism, so our teacher was telling us about how the greatest communist leader of all time, Lenin, had a very high forehead because he was a very smart guy. And then to her horrible shock and amazement, I get up and I say, the guy is bald as an onion, or something like that. So that's the kind of child that I was. I had problems with the Pioneer organization at the time because I had trouble when the school director would stay in front of the door of the school every day and put his hand like this on people's hair, and if the boy's hair is sticking above your head, they'll send you back home to get a haircut. So I told him, you know, guys, this is all so stupid. Like, I'm tired. I don't like people telling me what kind of hair I should have, how I should dress, where I should put my tie, like, and that it's disrespectful for the Communist Party if I take off my red tie and I don't know what else. So I don't want to have any of it. I don't want to be a member of anything that everyone else is a member anyway. So what's the benefit? I like to be a member of cool stuff that other people are not members of. So I don't like this. All in all, I had a very happy childhood. The beginning of the end of my childhood was about when I was 8 years old, when my mom was diagnosed with cancer. Yeah, I mean, what does a 7 or 8 year old know about cancer? All I knew was that she had a little lump on her throat. That's all I knew at the time. By the time I was 13, my mom was dead. So I'm 39 and a half now, and I've officially outlived my mom by a year. It gives me an interesting perspective sometimes. So when I was 13, my mom died, as I said, and my father started drinking. So, as I said, I had a very happy childhood. He's never touched me once. He's never hit me once. But I told you I was a rebel, so I was always yapping and never scared to say what I thought. So one day, he beat the crap out of me. I was 13 years old. And I said, you know what, man, that's it. I'm gone out of here. And I left. So I left when I was 13. Now, lucky for me, on my mother's sort of dying bed, she forced her sister, who was the best math teacher in the country, to promise her that she would prepare me for what was the best high school in Bulgaria at the time, called the Western Languages High School, and which was one of the few high schools where they would sort of have a meritocratic approach for students. You have very tough exams in literature and math, very high end. We're talking, when I was first year in university in the United States and Canada, we had kind of similar level of math that I had to take for grade 7 application for high school. One thing at that time is our educational system was second to none. And so my aunt followed her promise to her mom, and basically through, you know, I had other priorities at the time. I left home. I was not the kind of kid that you can really tell anything. So she had to use tricks and bribes and sometimes force to make me prepare for the test and, you know, do about a third of the work that her other students used to do to be able to go and pass the test. And it's a very competitive school. People from all over the country apply. They only accept about, let's say, I don't know, 30 or 40 people. And I was one of the lucky, probably number 38 or 39, like barely squeaked in, but I did. So I took the tests and I went in because I had my aunt to support me at that time, and because I was lucky, I was very good at literature, kind of naturally, and so I was fine. But again, school was not a priority for me, let alone, I couldn't care it's the best school in Bulgaria, and people were publishing articles. Bulgaria is being run by the high school in Plovdiv, Western Languages High School, because the prime minister and all the members of cabinet were from that school. You know, I was not on the school topic. I had other issues in my life at the time. So I barely made it through high school and had lots of trouble with absenteeism. And teachers learned from the first week that I never wrote homework once, and they never asked me after the second week too, because they learned very quickly. In my math class, I was the only one who was able to go like this and sleep pretty much for the whole class. And we had situations when the teacher would call my name and I would get up and I would say, I'm not ready, I'm not prepared. And she would say, okay, sit down. And then she'll call my friend Cyril, and he'll be like, oh, mumbling, and she's like, Cyril, you didn't study anything, poor, fail, F. And then he comes to me and he's like, how is this just? You know, she let you go off the hook and then she gives me an F. I was like, I don't know, I just told her I'm not ready. I was ready to take the F. Like, go tell her. I didn't, you know, make it unjust. And by the way, about 8 years ago, we were traveling across Europe with my wife, and we were passing by Amsterdam, and one of my best friends, the guy with whom I spent 5 years on the same desk in high school, he lives in Leverkusen. So he took the train and he came to visit me. And the first thing he told my wife, who at the time was my girlfriend, was a story that I had entirely forgotten, but kind of is maybe a little bit revealing. And it goes something like this. We had this computer science teacher, and I don't even know what she said or how she triggered me, but basically in the middle of the class, she tried to give me a hard time, and I looked her in the eye and I said, you're so stupid, and now I'm going to prove it to you. And now I got up, took the chalk, and started drawing the diagrams on the board and started putting forward a whole argument. And she just watched me for 2 minutes and then left crying. Now, I'm not saying that story because I'm proud of it. I'm not proud of it at all. It's easy to hurt people. I'm saying it because I want to show sort of the kinds of mistakes I tend to make. So after high school in Bulgaria at the time, the law was you either go to jail or you go to the army. It's a compulsory military service, so there's no choice. And so I went to the army. And you can imagine someone who has trouble being told what to do and what not to do, how well I fit in the army. Now, the funny part is that I actually was not too bad. And I actually excelled at when we had to get the job done. I used to do that actually surprisingly well. I was surprised of it myself. But I still had to get officers, especially when I thought they're threatening soldiers' lives in vain and for personal benefit and for no good reason at all whatsoever. So it got to a point where once we had an altercation with my commanding officer in front of the whole platoon. And in a military situation, you question the orders of a superior officer, you get shot on the spot. Because in the army, if you don't have discipline, you have nothing. The whole structure is based on discipline. So you lose discipline, it's anarchy. So you shoot people who question you on the spot. Lucky for me, I didn't get shot on the spot. I got sent into a punishment unit for 3 months. And by law, they couldn't even send me there because, you see, I was technically an orphan. My mom had passed away. I was living separately from my dad, and the law said I should be like within 50 kilometers from my town. But that didn't matter. In the army, stuff like that doesn't matter. So I got sent to northern Bulgaria, to the mountains of northern Bulgaria, in a punishment unit for 3 months. And at the time, they had the most stupidest system in the world. So imagine people who are punished, who, when you're in the military and you commit a crime, you're not prosecuted under civic law. You're prosecuted under military law with military court. And so while those proceedings are ongoing, people are being sent in a particular spot where I was sent. And even though there was no ongoing on anything, investigation on me or whatsoever, but my sort of companions in that unit were people with rapes, murders, stabbings, beatings, and probably the highest degree of education was about 4th grade. And I was from the best high school in the country and an orphan, and my crime was speaking at the commanding officer. And the funny part was that my officer sent me there to die. And the first night when I went there, so in the army, you get sort of respect in one of 2 ways. One is by rank. So obviously higher rank gives you kind of respect and authority and ability to command people. And the other one is by length of service, so or experience, presumably. So the presumption is the longer you've served, the more experience you have, and therefore the better you are. And so I was actually at the time already a corporal, because as I said, when it came to actually doing my job, I did pretty well. And I was in a place where everyone else was a private. So in terms of ranking, I was the highest ranking person in that platoon. But I was there sent for the first night. And I was the new guy. And that means very different. That means that you are a rookie, according to their interpretation of things anyway. And that means that, and people try and set those borders at the very beginning. And so which would have meant that I would have had to submit to the orders of people who were lower ranked than me, but obviously had more experience and service in that particular unit. The problem with that theory was that I am me, and I also had the key of the armory. So then the rumors began that I slept with a loaded AK-47 for the first 2 weeks. Of course, that's highly exaggerated. That only happened for the first 2 or 3 nights, until people were thinking I'm bluffing. And once it was established that I'm not bluffing, because I can't fight 50 people all at once unarmed, once that was established, we actually had order. And the commanding colonel was highly impressed, so I got promoted. So I became a sergeant. And he even put in some good word for me in Army headquarters and wanted me to be stationed there permanently, which totally infuriated my previous commanding officer when they sent me back to him 3 months later, promoted to a sergeant. So he gave me, as he said, 2 minutes to see if not 2 minutes, 2 days to see if I had smartened up. And it took him exactly 2 minutes to figure out that I haven't smartened up. And then he told me I'm being sent next to the Bermuda Triangle. And the Bermuda Triangle is a very particular place in the Bulgarian sort of border near Turkey. At the time, that was considered to be the dangerous border, where 3 very specific infantry units are placed. And the reason why it's called the Bermuda Triangle is very simple. People tend to disappear when you get sent there. And so at that point, I kind of mysteriously got terribly sick. And I had to retire for not being fit to serve anymore. So I served for 1 year, 1 month, and 26 days. And I had 124 armed night watches. And I spent 3 months in a punishment unit. After I retired from the Army, I was very lucky again. I got hired to work on the reception desk of the first private hotel in Bulgaria because of my previous luck that I studied in a Western languages high school, where, as I said, we had the best education in the world you can think of, and among many other things, not that I was actually doing any of the work, but just by being there, by proximity, I was fortunate enough to sort of suck up enough good knowledge to help me for the rest of my life, it seems. And we were studying there English, German, and Russian, in addition to a bunch of other things. No, I don't speak German. I used to study it. Well, I was there when we were being taught German, let me put it this way. Just like I was there when we were being taught English, but it's just this one stuck for some reason. And I used to do pretty good in Russian, but not anymore. So I had the job at the reception desk of a hotel. And at the time, we had hyperinflation in Bulgaria. So when I was a sergeant in the Army, I was making about 30 cents a month. And a pack of cigarettes would cost 50 cents. And my friend's father, who was a doctor, head of a wing of a hospital, was making $6 a month. And I was working on the reception of a hotel, and I was making $80 a month. And I was 18. So that was kind of totally crazy. And I had a very beautiful girlfriend, supposedly. I had a place to live, and people would tell me, man, you got it all figured out. You have a place to live, you have the best job, you have a gorgeous girlfriend. What's wrong with you? Why are you not happy? And I was like, no, this is not for me. I'm not happy. I want to go out. I feel like I've paid my dues to this country. I feel like I've paid everything if I owed anything. And I want to see the world. I want to be out of here. I've always felt like Socrates said, I was born Athenian, but I'm a citizen of the world. So I felt I was born Bulgarian, but I'm a citizen of the world. And as you'll find out a bit later, that turned out to be that Canadian is, in a way, the citizen of the world. For me, anyway. So basically, I dropped everything, and I had $3,000 in my pocket when I left Bulgaria. I was 21, and I worked in the hotel for about a year. And I spent $600 on a plane ticket. So in my pocket, when I was leaving, I had about $2,400 left. And the way out for me was university in the United States. But I couldn't pay for one. So I was accepted to 8 or 9 universities. I scored very high on TOEFL and a bunch of other tests, but coming from my high school, that wasn't very hard at all. But I couldn't pay for any of them. So the only place I could find to pay was a place called the College of West Virginia in Beckley, West Virginia. And the reason was that they did not discriminate between domestic state students, out-of-state students, and foreign students. Everyone was paying $1,200 per semester. That's it. And for the United States, that's very cheap. So given how much money I had, that was the only option of all the other 8 universities that got accepted. So that's where I went. And I had, you know, my plan was very simple. Finish with 4.0, win a scholarship, find a job, graduate, get a diploma, figure it out. So I went in and I finished with 4.0. That wasn't very hard in West Virginia. Again, coming from the high school that I was coming, when I was scoring 99.5 or something like that on the math test there, they were thinking I'm genius. I was like, guys, I barely passed math in high school after my exam. Like, I barely passed. I got to the point where my aunt, who loves me dearly and to whom I owe so much, told me, after I barely managed to finish high school, she told me, you know what, I've never had a student like you in my 50 years of experience. And basically, if you want to use math to go to university or something afterwards, you're on your own. I cannot handle you anymore. So, but I had the foundation, and then when I had the right motivation, and I actually, school became actually at the top of my priority list, I was able to change the outcome. And so I finished with 4.0, but then I was told, unfortunately, that the American taxpayer, of course, would never pay for a Bulgarian citizen to study in one of their institutions. And so I had to figure it out. So in the summer, I went to work around the east coast of the United States, and I covered pretty much most of the east coast from Key West to New York. Best time I had was being a rickshaw pusher in Atlantic City. I don't know how many of you have been to Atlantic City, but there's a very nice boardwalk between the casinos, and there's usually a bunch of young Eastern Euros pushing the rickshaws. So I did that for about 2 months. Had the best time doing it, met the craziest people, best stories that I've remembered in the United States, and made enough money to go back to university and pay for the next year. I went back in, and in 3 days, and I had reputation already established. I had a very good car for some reason, because my first job was I was working in a Little Caesars pizza shop, and the owner was buying a pickup truck and wanted to get rid of his Mazda RX-7. And I was like this 20-year-old kid, and I was like, I cannot pay for that car. He's like, oh, it's okay, I'll give it to you for $1,000, and you don't even have to pay it for me. You can work it off for the next couple of months. I was like, okay, that works. So when I sent the first picture with my new car to Bulgaria, people were like, wow, you're driving what? So I had a car, I had a job in West Virginia. When I came back from the rickshaw shop, I was working in a Santa Claus shop for this one Chinese guy who was importing Santa Clauses from this big to any size you can imagine and selling them all year round throughout the world. So my job was in the warehouse to move the Santa Clauses. And I had reputation in the school as being pretty much the best one they've ever seen, probably. And in 3 days, I decided it's not worth it. And I left for Canada. Because I thought, well, can I do this? Yes. Is it worth it? No. Why? Because no one's ever heard of West Virginia. And most likely after I graduate, they're going to kick me out of the country anyway, because my student visa is going to expire. And if I look for a job, people would say, oh, you graduated the College of West Virginia. What the hell is that even? So in 3 days, I changed my mind and I decided it's not worth it. So I dropped everything. I sold my car and went and started again from the ground up in Canada. And my friends in West Virginia would say, you're totally nuts, man. You've built so much here. Why are you dropping it all off? And I was like, it's not what I'm looking for. It's not it. That's not it. So I went to Canada, and I went to the University of Toronto, and I started with philosophy. And I had the most amazing supervisor, philosopher, who in the first day of school looked at my sort of curriculum and told me, see, the problem with you is that you've got too much philosophy here. You've got to go out there and try some other stuff. If you want to be a good philosopher, you have to try other things. To me at the time, that kind of blew my mind. I was like, so I'm doing philosophy and I'm coming to the Department of Philosophy and your criticism is that I do too much philosophy? Really? But that was totally profound. So I took some political science courses, and the idea was, my main interest was in ethics, as you will see. Politics, at least in theory, should be the place where you apply ethics. And of course, you cannot do politics unless you have a very good foundation in economics, so therefore I had to study economics. So I ended up graduating with a double joint specialist in political science and philosophy and a minor in economics. Again, some of my previous character flaws came to the fore in a class of political philosophy taught by a very peculiar school of teachers called Straussians. Some of you may be familiar, followers of Leo Strauss. Paul Wolfowitz is one of them, and they're very tightly related to the Chicago School of Economics. So I was in that class, and I almost started a war between the Department of Political Science, the Department of Philosophy, and the Department of English, because we were working off the political plays of Shakespeare and some ancient classic texts like Thucydides and the ancient Greeks. But the Straussians have a very crazy interpretation, or at least what I thought was totally nuts. So, for example, when we were studying Julius Caesar, they would say something like, Julius Caesar knowingly and willingly sacrificed himself. So he knew that he would get killed. He sacrificed himself for the greatest good of Rome, just like Jesus did. And I was like, what? Excuse me? And I look around and everyone's quiet. I was like, you can't be serious. Like, am I crazy or this makes no sense whatsoever? So then I went to my friends in philosophy. I went to a friend of mine who was doing a PhD on Shakespeare in the Department of English, and we had a war. And my friends were telling me, you know what? It's not worth your time. It's not worth your time. Drop it. Drop the class. So it's going to ruin your GPA, and it's a waste of time. Don't do it. And I said, no, I'm not dropping the class. And I met a girl there, and we've been together for 12 years. So yes, it ruined my GPA. Yes, it was a waste of time, but I'm the happiest man in the world as a result of being in that class. After U of T, I was accepted to London School of Economics. Decided to stay in Canada instead. Said I've never been one big on labels, and went to U of T. Went to York University, where I was doing political science, and I was looking for a new and fresh topic to write my thesis on. And I thought, well, let me write something on the drone warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan. That was about 2005, 2006. No one was talking about drone warfare at the time. The American military had only a dozen, at best, poorly working drones. So I ended up writing a paper called Hacking Destiny, Critical Security at the Intersection of Machine and Human Intelligence. And in the process of writing that paper, I discovered Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near. And that book totally blew my mind. Like, it totally blew my mind completely. Anyway, so I graduated from university at the peak of the recession. I had all kinds of honors and awards and quotations and I don't know what, but after 200 resumes out, I stopped counting. Maybe after 300, I had one interview. That was it. The best part is that at the time, a website called Singularity Hub had an opening for staff writers. And I thought, wait a minute, I've been kind of doing my thesis on the singularity, and they say I'm a pretty good writer. Why don't I apply for that job? So I sent the resume, and I never heard back. And it took a week or two of me waiting and checking my email, and it occurred to me that maybe I don't need them. Maybe, just maybe, I can start and do this thing on my own. I mean, how hard can it be, right? And so I started, again, I'm a political science and philosophy and economics student, I knew nothing about web design or any of that sort. And it took me 3 months to put my first HTML web page, and it was absolutely gruesome. It was the most ugliest thing you can ever imagine. It was horrible. And it took me another 6 months to get a website going called SingularitySymposium.com, and maybe 4 or 5 iterations. And it's still pretty horrible. You can, and I haven't touched it in 5 years. You can still go and see it. It's up there. But lucky for me, 6 months later, I discovered WordPress. And I was like, wow, this actually makes things so much easier. You can actually blog. You can actually write stuff, and you don't need to know HTML. And despite the fact that I had all the fears of, you know, not being a tech guy and stuff like that and going into a tech topic, you know, I thought, yeah, I'm fearful and I'm very scared, but what's the worst that could happen? So I gave it a try. 6 months later, I discovered podcasting. And again, I was super fearful. I was like, I don't know anything about audio and video gear. I have this weird Bulgarian accent. You know, people here in North America are going to listen to me for a minute and judge me and say, oh, this guy can't even speak proper English, like, let alone, why should we even listen to him, right? So I was very scared, but I thought, again, what's the worst that could happen? So I gave it a try. And one thing led to another. Today, I've done 182 episodes with some of the smartest people around the world. I have 3 million downloads between iTunes and YouTube. My podcast is available on Vimeo, YouTube, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, and iTunes. And I reach about 150,000 people per month. Also, I discovered in that time Singularity University. And they started about the same time when I started blogging. So the first time when I applied to Singularity University, again, nothing happened. I applied again the second time. I got a little bit further down the line, but on the last round, I didn't make it. The third year when I was applying, I thought to myself, I should be a little bit more strategic about this whole thing. So how can I improve my chances? And I thought, well, probably since I can't change who I am over like 6 months or a year until the next application goes, I can change my letters of references. So how can I find the best known people in Silicon Valley to support my application, or people that are known in Silicon Valley? So again, through my podcast. So in the end, I had Aubrey de Grey, Dr. James Martin, who has written like 120 books on computer science and is one of the top 5 most influential people in the history of computing, perhaps, who wrote me a letter of reference. And I had Kevin Warwick, the first cyborg, who wrote me a letter of reference. And then I thought, it's a sure thing. I'm in. And of course, I was put on the waiting list. So the only reason why I ever made it to Singularity University is because someone else actually didn't. That's the only reason why I actually ever made it there. I was not supposed to be there. They were supposed to be there. And the other little thing that may have made a little difference is a little exchange that I had with someone called Ross Schott, who is one of my heroes, of course, from Singularity University, who told me, we really apologize to notify you that we have to place you on the waiting list. What's the last time we can let you know if you've been accepted or not? And I said, you can call me 10 minutes before the opening ceremony, and I will walk, swim, fly, or crawl. I will do anything to be there on time. I don't care whatever it takes. And he was like, wow, I've never gotten a response like this one. Okay. So, and of course, they called me like literally maybe in the 2 o'clock in the afternoon the day before everything started. And they're like, okay, you're in. I was like, okay, but remember what I said? I said that if you don't give me 100% full scholarship, I cannot come. If you give me 90%, I cannot come. If you give me 95%, I still cannot come because it's like $30,000 or something like that. And at the time, my wife was going through a very tough period with her business. She was just starting a new business. My dad had 2 or 3 bypass surgeries and heart attacks in Bulgaria. So and I was like a blogger who had the business foresight to give away everything that I produce for free, available to anyone in the world. So I had no money. And I told him, if you give me 98% of a scholarship, I cannot come. So they're like, it's okay, it's 100%, you can come. I was like, damn, okay, great. So all I did was I just tweeted, I can't believe this, I'm being accepted to Singularity University. One of my blog readers saw my tweet and said, wait, you totally deserve it, I'm gonna buy your plane ticket. I was like, what? I'm gonna buy your plane ticket. I was like, no freaking way. Like 6 hours ago, I wasn't even accepted. Now I'm being accepted and someone's paying for my plane ticket. That's totally nuts. So I walk into the airport like I'm walking on water. And guess what happens next? The Department of Homeland Security. 10 hours. 4 times they tell me, you are not getting in. I'm like, seriously? Guys, I'm Canadian citizen. My wife is American. The guy told me, son, it's only you and me now. Moses himself cannot part the sea for you unless I say so. I was like, whoa. He's the president of the United States, cannot let you in if I sign this paper that says you cannot enter. So, and I'm not the kind of guy who gets stopped. I don't care if you're the DHS. So 4 times they had to walk me out with security. Best part of it is that their shift only lasts 8 hours. New shift came in, I went right through. That's how secure the borders are. Old shift didn't like me, new shift didn't seem to mind me. So I made it. Anyway, so let me just give you a second on my philosophy on blogging, and then I'll jump into the nut cracking. So my philosophy is, first of all, my blog, you have to understand, is not about technology at all. My blog is about ethics. Technology is amoral. What we choose to do or not to do with technology is a moral choice. It's an ethical choice. The difference we make is when we apply technology. So it's not about technology, it's about ethics. Secondly, I have very strong views, as you've seen. But my views are not important. And my views are always being used just to set the stage, to set the tone. My blogging name is Socrates because I love asking questions and because I believe that's who I am. And people judge me as they would and say, you're the most arrogant person to call yourself Socrates. Perhaps they're right. I think maybe I've earned it, but it doesn't matter what I think. It's what you think in the end of the day. My goal is always to create a symposium. So all I'm trying to do is set the stage and throw in as many ideas as possible at you. And my opinion is not better than any other opinion. It's only one opinion to bounce ideas off and to give you ideas. And in the end of the day, the most important thing is what you think. And if I've done my job right, it's not to teach you anything. If I've done my job right, it's I will be the midwife to you giving birth to your own ideas. That's what Socrates did, and that's why his students went all over the place and all over the map and changed the history of the world and were mutually incompatible. But he created that space for people.